Welcome to the Law School Toolbox Podcast. Today we have an exciting guest joining us to talk about accommodations for the LSAT, law school, and the bar exam. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are typically Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess, that's me, but today it will just be me. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Allison and I are the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Conference. Allison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review and rating on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today, we are chatting with Dr. Jared Maloff, who is a licensed clinical psychologist in Beverly Hills, California. He works therapeutically with a vast array of adult, adolescent, and child clients, presenting a variety of symptoms and diagnoses. But why he's joining our podcast today is that he also conducts psychological evaluations to help students get testing accommodations for standardized tests such as the LSAT, law school exams, and the California bar exam, just to name a few. So first, would you just share a bit more about what got you interested in working specifically with students who are looking to get accommodations?
Sure. This was something that I became interested in while I was in graduate school. The courses that I was taking were helping me to understand how to administer these kinds of academic tests, and I was able to start getting some field hours in places where they did this, like in schools, in community colleges, where they had a lot of people that needed this type of assistance. And when I started to open my own practice, which was 10 years ago, I found that there was just a demand for this. It was something I happened to like doing in terms of the testing and really figuring out what made people's minds work and what helped them learn better and what their weaknesses were. So there seemed to be something of a void. Obviously, other people do this, but particularly in the area of doing the LSAT testing, and then doing testing for people who are law students in the bar exam, there really was a void. There were basically not too many people doing it. So I started to advertise a little bit that I could do this, and what happened was all of a sudden people started really responding to it. And so since then, I do all kinds of educational testing for people at all ages and different academic programs, but really the vast majority of them are people that are in some process of the law school or the legal profession. So they're either want to go to law school, in law school, or they're taking the bar.
So do you think, so the people that you work with kind of by the time they get to graduate school, have they felt like that they had maybe some learning related struggles in the past that just never really felt critical enough, or that they were influencing their performance enough? Or is law school does it kind of bring it out of people, which I think somewhat can because of the way that the system is set up?
Right. So, here's the thing about people that are already in law school, or people who are, typically trying to get into law school. You're mostly dealing with people that are really smart.
Right.
And you're also dealing with people that are willing to work pretty hard. And so what ends up happening is if you have people that are really smart, who are really willing to work hard, is that through the lower levels of school, let's say elementary school, middle school, high school, just by working hard and being smart, you can pretty much get through unless you have, an extremely severe disability. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these people get through, then they go to college. And what I've noticed is a lot of people who are going to law school or are going to go to law school, they usually take a major that is sort of conducive to fitting in with their weaknesses. So for example, a lot of them are political science majors or history majors, and most colleges that I've seen anyway, the way they assess their students who have these majors is they complete a lot of work outside of the classroom setting. So it's a lot of reading, but the reading isn't necessarily time limited, and it's a lot of papers. So they're not taking that many in-class time limited examinations. And then what happens is they get to law school, and all of a sudden, there are very few examinations, and they're all timed, and they're all rigorously timed. Mm-hmm. So it is true that people can sort of get through with a lot of these types of learning issues or disabilities, and then once they get to law school, they finally hit a wall. So people that really do have a disability, for the vast majority of them, they're going to hit a wall at some point if they keep advancing their education.
Interesting.
And obviously, law school is tough for everybody. But if you have any issues with reading or attention, it's going to really bring it out in law school.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So what are the common diagnoses that usually lead to getting accommodations, either for the LSAT, law school, or the bar exam?
So the ones that I see most frequently are ADHD. A lot of people that I see who have ADHD or think they have ADHD, they often get ADHD and ADD confused. They used to make a distinction within the diagnostic manual that psychologists use, but now they just call everything ADHD. So it would be ADHD, a learning disorder in the area of reading, or a learning disorder in the area of written expression, so that means writing. And then I also see people with some psychiatric diagnoses like severe anxiety, which manifests as panic during examinations, or OCD, which also can really affect the way a person takes a test. So those are basic diagnoses that I see, and I'm able to do different testing that can indicate that not only they have these disorders, but that it's affecting them in a way that creates a disability. So that's the important part to think. It's not just having a diagnosis, it's evaluating, does the diagnosis impair you to a degree in which you would need, some support or accommodations.
And, I'm realizing that a lot of people who are listening who might be thinking, wow, this sounds a lot like me or something that I've been struggling with. The idea of getting tested for things can sound really intimidating. I think a lot of people aren't even sure what that entails. Can you give our listeners a bit of an idea of, what is this type of testing that they need to go through? And is it, something that they should be nervous about, or is it really kind of innocuous?
Well, people who get nervous about taking tests in general will, of course, be nervous about this kind of a process. So whether they should be nervous is another question. I don't really think any should. I don't know that anyone should be nervous, but they are taking a test that is going to look into their strengths and also their weaknesses. So sometimes I see people putting off this kind of testing because they think they understand their weaknesses, and maybe they do, but they don't really want to focus in on them so much. So sometimes I see people that come in because they know they need it, but they're pretty reluctant in that they've had these thoughts for a long time, but then they come in and they sort of are afraid they're going to learn something that's going to change the way they think about themselves. And the reason why people don't need to be worried about this is because I always say the testing is not going to uncover anything that they don't already know about themselves.
Oh, interesting.
It's not like they're going to come in and they're going to learn, they really aren't intelligent at all, or they're going to learn they're a psychopath or something. You're not learning this type of thing. You're just identifying what it is that they already think is going on with them. So people generally know if they read very slowly, or they know if they have a really hard time paying attention and evidencing concentration. So we're just looking into what they pretty much already know. The process does take, with me anyway, I can't comment on how long other people's testing goes, but the stuff that I do usually takes about 4 or 5 hours. So people can break it up into 2 visits, or they can do 1 long visit. Other people might give different, tests or more tests, but that's what I do. And obviously I try to make it as reasonable as possible. I, don't try to give anyone a hard time. And
that would make you a bad psychologist if you started to give your clients and patients a really hard time.
No, I don't give them a hard time. And, I let them know that they're there because they're trying to help themselves. They're trying to gain access to something that they need that's going to enable them to be a better student, or to pass an examination like the bar that's, really important, or to do their best on the LSAT, which is going to dictate where they go to law school and might actually dictate a lot about, their professional life. So
Yeah.
these are really high stakes tests, and it's important to, get help if it's needed.
I think that that's a really great point. And, I talk to a lot of both potential law students, and people taking the bar exam. And a portion of that population does struggle with learning disabilities in some form or another. And a lot of them have read some of the writing you've done on the bar exam toolbox. And the line in one of those posts that we'll link to in the show notes that is mentioned to me over and over again is this idea that real life has deadlines. So why should these students ask for extra time? Because a lot of them feel like that they should just be able to do it in the time that's allowed to them. And I think that idea that, there's some sort of like cheating element to getting accommodations, I think, especially for students who are used to be very high performing, prevents them from accessing, what they need to level the playing field. And I think it's kind of heartbreaking for students, but could you elaborate just a bit more about why it's important for students who need these accommodations to go ahead and get them?
Right. So, the point you bring up is important about people that are reluctant or afraid. Sometimes people's cultures within which they're raised encourages them to be really stoic and encourages them to, buck up, and you should be able to do it on your own. And this idea of, well, you don't get, an extension in real life. If you're the kind of lawyer that has to file things on certain deadlines for court, obviously you have to meet those deadlines. There's not going to be an extension there. But when we compare that kind of deadline, the deadline that a boss might give you versus the deadline that is given on a final examination, on the LSAT, or on the bar examination, it's really comparing apples to oranges. So what I mean by that is, let's say you work at a really demanding law firm, and you're a person that has ADHD or a reading disorder, so you're doing things slower than other people, but you're really motivated and you're willing to work hard, if not even harder than your peers who don't have these diagnoses. So sometimes I hear, people that are working in law firms who maybe haven't passed the bar yet, they'll say, well, I'm working 70 hours a week. And the guys that I work with, they're usually working 50 hours a week. So if you're on the job, you have the ability to stay late at the office. You have the ability to take work home. So even though there are deadlines in an office setting, you have the ability to work when other people aren't working in order to meet those deadlines by taking it home, staying late. When you're taking the bar exam or any other standardized test, once they say pencils down, pencils have to go down. There's no ability to compensate for your weakness if you're doing things slower than other people. So the only way to compensate for that is by giving a testing accommodation, and thereby it's really apples to oranges, because the people in the work setting, they are actually compensating by probably working longer hours. It's just not necessarily showing up the way it would if you're taking a test, and when it's time to stop, they make you stop.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And when I talk to students about it, oftentimes I just try and remind them that the artificial constraints of the exam setting are preventing them from showing the professors how much they know, because they're being held back by things that aren't, how well they know the law, how well they can do legal analysis, the quality of their writing, because of those artificial time constraints. And then if you can remove that and allow them to really shine, then they are able to compete. And I think that is fair. I mean, that's the whole idea behind these accommodations, right? It's to level the playing field so we can all compete. I mean, law school's kind of competitive, but we need to be able to compete on a level playing field.
Right, that's true. So anyone with a disability of any kind, and that extends for people who might have trouble walking, or people that have motor coordination issues. These are people that have many abilities, and no one should be discriminated against because they do things differently than another person.
Right.
So a reading disorder is, under the law is no different from, someone with a physical problem. And, no one would say that they shouldn't put ramps in, for a person that's in a wheelchair. So, the reality is that these are diagnoses that people can't see. Or no one can see that you have a reading disorder or ADHD, but, they are there nonetheless. And you are correct. Nobody should have to fight against themselves to show what they know.
Yeah.
They should have the ability to express, their knowledge.
And I think one thing that students often also underestimate is the variety of accommodations that can be available to them based on whatever their struggles are. I think for me, that's something I've really learned since starting to work with law students and bar studiers is that, oftentimes things that you wouldn't necessarily expect can become a real game changer, whether or not it's just a learning disability or even some different physical disabilities, or if you have a health condition that they need to accommodate for. But I've had students who've had all sorts of different accommodations, from being able to, eat a snack. In California, during the bar exam, you're not allowed to eat during the session. Right. So being able to have a snack, being able to use the restroom to get an additional time so you have the ability to use the restroom, taking the exam in a private room or room with one other person, extended time, being able to have water with you in the room, different lighting situations, whether or not the print is bigger on the book. I mean, I think it's really one of the things that I find amazing is that I think it's important for students to kind of open their minds to what is available to them to level the playing field. Because I think some students might say, well, I have, XYZ health issue. So, man, it's going to be really hard for me not to drink water for 3 hours, but I guess I just can't. So it's going to be a struggle. It's like, well, you should ask the bar. They might let you do that, or your school might let you do that, if they have strict rules about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're exactly right. People have to advocate for themselves, and a lot of times they need help from a professional like what I do, or, if it's a physical problem, they, need to go see their doctor. I've seen a lot of people who have issues with chronic pain. They've been in a car accident. They've had surgeries. And, these are tests that are really a very long, they go on for hours and hours. So some people can't sit for 3 hours without developing, severe pain. And, for them, they might be able to stop the clock, take a break right in the middle of the test, stretch, do all of these things that, as you're saying, could be game changers to help them actually function on this test. And another point is that while, the bar obviously is pretty stringent in their requirements. However, all of these accommodations that you've mentioned are things that I've seen people get on the bar. So, if you have legitimate issues, they will let you do these things if you provide the correct documentation. But also at the school level, the schools are really looking to help their students because they want their students to succeed. So if you have the correct documentation, schools will typically go even farther than the bar will in trying to accommodate their students, because every school wants to be able to say that, we have students that are successful, they're getting high GPAs, they're passing the bar at a high level, they're getting jobs. So, the schools are interested in being there as long as people can document these things properly.
Absolutely. And I think for those law students who are considering maybe talking to their school or their school's disability services about getting accommodations, it's also important to remember that the school will even help you throughout the school year. So I know one of the programs that my law school had was they would hire note takers in all the classes. And then we would those notes would be distributed to students who had a relationship with disability services if taking notes in class was something that they needed help with. And, again, this was something that I didn't really know that the schools would provide, but it was such a game changer for some of those students to be able to have another person's notes that they could check their stuff against, in an anonymous way. Right. So there was no stigma attached to it for them and things like that. And so, that's why it is so important to go and talk to the schools and see. You might not even appreciate what help you could get, especially if this is something that you didn't struggle with in your youth.
Well, that's true. And I think also you bring up an important point when you say the word stigma. I really think a lot of people avoid going this route, especially in their earlier days, because they're afraid people are going to make fun of them, or they're afraid their friends are going to resent them or something like that. The reality is that, when you get these kinds of accommodations, it really is anonymous. So people are entitled to confidentiality with their medical information, and of course this is included. So, the school is not going to advertise that, these people in class are people that have accommodations. Some of the classmates might notice if people are taking their finals in a different room that, they seem to not be there when everyone else is taking the finals. But apart from that, there's no advertisement made that certain people are getting accommodations. And, for people still in college and for people who want to take the LSAT and try to get into law school, sometimes people are saying that they are afraid that somehow the LSAC is going to send materials to bar schools, or not to bar schools, to law schools, to let people know this person got accommodations. And of course they don't do that. So people have a lot of fears about privacy and about what other people are going to find out, especially law schools. And the reality is that, that stuff doesn't happen. People's information is kept private. Otherwise, we'd have a big lawsuit against.
That's so true. So what do you think are the biggest mistakes students make when either, working with someone like you to get accommodations, or researching their accommodation options, or applying for accommodations?
In terms of, are you asking mistakes they make in terms of choosing who to get evaluated by?
Well, that's a good place to start. Why don't we start with who they have to talk to get evaluated with?
Okay, so, students need to find somebody who has experience with this type of work. So, for example, if someone is going to get evaluated by a psychologist to try to get accommodations on the bar exam, it needs to be someone with a lot of experience working with the state bar. And the reason I say that is because it's not enough to just be able to document that a person has a certain diagnosis. You have to know that the bar requires that you administer certain tests. You have to know also that the bar and LSAC and whoever else, they require the information to be presented in a certain kind of way. It's almost like if you imagine a lawyer in a courtroom needs to present their case in a certain way in order to be effective. It's sort of the same way here, where you have all the information, but then it needs to be presented in a persuasive manner, in a manner that sort of answers all the questions that the bar or LSAC might have ahead of time, so that they don't come back and say, we have a lot of questions on this report, or this doesn't make sense. So they have to go with someone who has this experience. And I would say that's sort of the biggest, that's the first thing that people need to do.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people probably don't think that, all psychologists are not created equal, or, in the sense of having this experience. And then, there is, of course, a bureaucracy to this, whether it be in the schools or with, LSAC or the bar exam. And you definitely want somebody who can help you play that game in the way that it needs to be played, as much as possible.
So people, there are lots of psychologists out there in the world, and, a lot of them don't do testing, but, many do. And so if people have someone that they want to work with, they shouldn't be afraid to ask, how many times have you submitted paperwork for someone to get accommodations on the bar or on the LSAT? And if they say, I've done it 3 times in the last 5 years, maybe maybe they would want to find someone with more experience than that.
I think that's a really good point, especially because this is, let's be honest, can be a bit of an expensive process. I know that cost is something you've also talked about on our blog, but how do you think that students who are struggling with the financial burden can, be thoughtful through this process and do it with at least the less, as little cost impact as they can?
Well, so there is a cost to doing this. I feel like the cost, that I can't comment on what other people charge. I don't know. I think my fees are pretty reasonable. The reason it costs a lot, though, is because, what I said before is you're looking at maybe 4 to 5 hours of one-on-one testing, and then it probably takes about 10 hours to score and to write up this report. You're talking about a report that's going to be 25 pages long, and then you're filling out paperwork from the bar website. So it's a time-intensive process, and that's why the cost, can get up there. It's just a lot of hours. However, I think the way people need to think about it is, when someone gets into law school, sometimes they make their decision based on, well, which school is giving me the most scholarship money, or
Right.
which school can I get the most financial aid for. But, if someone is going to have a chance to get into the school of their dreams, or the school that they think is going to give them the best chance to get the best job, and it costs a little bit more, they're probably not going to say, well, I won't go there.
Right.
They're willing to take on, whether it's a little bit extra in loans. If people really think that they have a chance to make a big difference in their career, then it's probably worth it. And so I think when people think about getting accommodations, they need to think of it as part of their education. People spend also a lot on these prep courses that help you pass the bar,
Right.
which is very important, because if you go to law school for 3 years, you still have to pass the bar, so we can't forget that part. And, it's part of the cost of education. And if it's going to help a person get a really good job, then it has to be seen as being absolutely worth it. The other thing about this I would mention is that while people are still in law school, oftentimes they can get their school to give them financial aid to get the testing done.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that, actually.
So I can't comment on what every law school does,
Right.
but I have worked with several law schools where, I'll tell them what the fee is, and then they will make funds available for their student in order to, pay for the assessment. And they do that because the schools will look at this and they'll say, well, this is really part of the schooling process. This is part of one's education. So just like we make funds available for them to buy books, we'll make funds available for them to do this. So
Interesting.
That's something people can look into.
I've also talked to veterans who are able to also get some testing through veterans resources as well. So, I think, like most things, there are oftentimes more resources out there for yourself than we even all appreciate, that you got to go ask around and see what's
Right.
available to you. And one more point on cost. I think this also, especially related to the bar exam, this is something that, we talk about with students a lot, especially people who have maybe failed the exam and now think it's time to go apply for accommodations, but they are worried about the financial burden. I think it is important, especially with the bar, to calculate the cost of sitting for the exam each time you sit for it without everything you need to be successful. And, I think it can just seem like, well, it costs, sometimes $1,000, $1,500 or more with, hotels and transportation, or, plus all the fees to the bar and the laptop fee. And that's not even accounting your bar prep course or a tutor. But
Wow.
yeah, I know it's sobering, but I think one of the realities is it's expensive just to sit for the test. Sitting for the test without being prepared for it or giving yourself the best possible likelihood of passing, I think, is not a good use of those funds. And so sometimes, when I talk to students and they're like, well, I can't get accommodations because it's going to cost so much to take the test. If you're going to have to pay all that money to sit for a test that, because of, your individualized situation, you're not giving yourself the best chance at passing, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to sit for that test. So one of the things you might have to do is sit down and really look at the numbers and say, is it worth it to, wait one cycle to be able to get this accommodations and possibly save more money to sit for the test again, or, possibly take out another loan, or, ask for all my family Christmas presents for a year to go to. I mean, the February bar season's coming up, and I always feel like I always have a bunch of students who say that bar tutoring is their gift from their families for the year, But what better gift can you give someone than trying to help them facilitate, reaching this goal that they need?
Absolutely.
So. Yeah. So it is important for students to really sit down and run the numbers, because it is heartbreaking for me when students feel like they just don't have what they need to be successful, whether it be because of, physical stuff that they have going on, learning disabilities that they worry that they've been struggling with, but, that something's kind of standing in their way. I think another thing that students oftentimes don't know that, psychologists can help them with is once they have this diagnosis, and I hope this is true because I tell students this is true, so you can tell me if I'm wrong, that a psychologist can help them with coping mechanisms to really study and make the most of the exam time that they have. Is that true? That there are different ways that you can manage your time or learn?
Yeah, well, that's certainly true for a lot of these different diagnoses that we've talked about. So certainly, if somebody has a mental health problem like anxiety, that really spikes on tests, psychologists can help them learn, ways of calming themselves down, ways of lowering their heart rate, ways of, getting them calmer so that they're not panicking. And, usually when people panic, they can't think straight. So we can help them certainly calm down and get ready for a test. Someone with ADHD lots of times will benefit from not just a psychologist, but a psychiatrist who might be able to prescribe medication. Some people need to learn increased organizational skills. A psychologist can help with that. And then also someone who is going to get this testing done is going to learn not only what their diagnosis is and have someone make an argument why they should get accommodations, but they're also going to learn about their learning strengths and weaknesses. So they might be able to take things away from their report that they can implement into their study routine. So they might be able to learn certain techniques that just help them prepare better.
Yeah. I've actually had students, our private tutoring students, sometimes share these reports with us, and it's been really helpful because, we can see some of those recommendations and help tailor some of our recommendations to what their strengths and weaknesses are. And it is, it is challenging, but I think we all have to figure out how to succeed at these tests in law school and the LSAT, based to our own individual strengths and weaknesses. That's part of one of your responsibilities is creating this, we talk about law school as a learned skill. You have to learn it, learn how you're going to excel. But the more information you have can allow you to, make better choices about how you spend your time. And I've seen the most interesting coping mechanisms really make a difference for students. I had students a number of years back who was struggling with ADHD and was able to fight for accommodations for the California bar. And she had been practicing meditation throughout part of her law school experience, and especially during the bar exam. And she found that actually doing 5-minute meditations throughout the extended time period allowed her to refocus her mind. And so she strategically placed, decided at what points she was going to stop and take this break. And she would literally, they let her do this. She was taking it in a separate room. She sat on the floor and did a 5-minute meditation, and it was a complete game changer for her. And I was so proud of her because she really thought outside the box and thought, what has been working for me and how can I bring this into my testing room because I have worked to get these accommodations. I think there's really powerful stuff that can be done.
Yeah, you're right. That's a great point. Everyone has different things that bring them comfort or calm. And so if people can tap into that and try to remember what are the things that they do when they're at home, when they're by themselves, just to calm themselves down, you're right. Those are things that can be implemented on a test like the bar. But of course, that person needed a private room in order to facilitate that. Right. So
I don't think the proctors would have been cool with her sitting on the floor in the main testing room.
Right. Yeah, that's true. But you're right. That person was really knowledgeable about themselves and insightful. And it sounds like it helps her to pass the test.
Yeah. So with all of this stuff that we've been talking about, one of the lessons I really want our listeners to take away, no matter where they are in this process, where it's you're considering taking the LSAT or you are taking the bar exam for the first time or a repeat taker, is do not delay in starting this process, because you don't want this to be a fire drill. You want the time to find the right person to do the testing. You want to go through the testing, which, as you've mentioned, just by the nature of it, is time consuming. You need to either be able to work with your school, work with LSAC, work with a bar. Sometimes I know with the bar, they might kick things back to you. So you need time to write a response to that or get more information. And I think what's really important for me when I help students prepare for these tests is I want the student to know what their testing environment's going to be like. Because how can we come up with creative solutions if we don't know if you get extended time, if we don't know if you get your own private room. If we don't know if you are going to get some accommodations for, physical ailments you might have, being able to take breaks and things like that. So, finding out that you get accommodations 14 days before the test is not letting you get the most out of the accommodation process.
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, that's less than ideal.
Yeah.
If people get started early, they can find out earlier whether they get the accommodations. But of course, if people are listening to this, there's still time before the February test, and
sure.
Obviously for the July one as well.
Yeah. But, don't turn in your application like on the very last day if you can help it. Hey, if that's the deal you've got to do, do it. Don't not apply.
Right.
But
right.
Excuse me. But if you've been thinking about this and you're chewing on it and it's something you want to investigate, try and do it before, especially for the bar, before the full prep cycle, because it is time consuming and can be a little stressful, and you don't need additional stress on that. As much as you can,
right.
The earlier, the better. Even in law school, if students at the beginning of the semester, especially if you're 1Ls, if you're mid-semester, a lot of people have just taken midterms, if you're getting feedback from your professors, some professors will highlight issues that they think might flag that you need to go get tested for things. Go do that as soon as that's flagged for you, because you want to do that before it's impacted your grades. I think what a lot of times happens for students in law school is, as I thought you were so eloquent in pointing out, the fact that, law school is just a different work type situation. And that if you're finding that you just can't, your hard work is not getting you where you need to be, if you wait until after grades come out and then you don't perform at your best, then those grades unfortunately stay with you. And that doesn't mean that you can't overcome them. I've had plenty of students who struggled, that first semester, first year, then got tested, maybe got medication, maybe have new coping mechanisms, maybe got accommodations, and then their grades went in an upward trajectory. From there, they can tell that story in a job interview. They can tell that's, that is a story of kind of being able to say, hey, there was a problem, I fixed it, and then you can see my performance is at a different place. But if you can identify this stuff and deal with it before those grades, I think it's even better. So.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Planning, is always going to help things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this has been incredibly interesting. Is there any other final tips or are there any other final tips you might have for students who are kind of scratching their head and wondering if this is something they should investigate?
Sure. I think that, people should just really try to be honest with themselves. And a lot of times, once people start thinking about it, they're already aware that there's some type of issue. So it never hurts to look into it. It never hurts to call someone and just say over the phone before you even make an appointment with someone like me, who can do these evaluations, present the information to the person over the phone. Say, this is what I struggle with. This is where I am in school. This is what my grades have been. And a lot of times over the phone, a person can get an idea as to what's going on and whether there's something really there that can be looked into. Sometimes you end up hearing over the phone that a person's dealing with something that really seems more circumstantial, and it seems like something that either will pass or it sounds like something that might, not lead to accommodations. But, just a 10-minute discussion over the phone, prior to making a commitment to making an appointment can often let an evaluator know, whether this person has a reasonable chance or not. And, that's at absolutely no risk to the student.
Yeah. And I think goes back to the point we were talking about earlier of kind of releasing yourself from these ideas and judgment around the fact that this might be something that's going on, and just starting to investigate the process and talk to people. Either if you're in school, at your school, call an expert, and start the process, because, we can stand in our own way in a lot of these things, and learning more about it is only going to, maybe give you confidence to really decide if this is going on, and try not to be too judgmental on ourselves. I mean, lawyers are notoriously judgmental of themselves, and they're notorious perfectionists. And so anytime that we have to admit flaws or failure, it can be a real challenge for us. But, it's a good life lesson, I guess, to try and push yourself out of your comfort zone and, and learn more and learn more about yourself. I loved that you made that point, that this is really a way to learn more about you and how to make yourself as successful as you can be.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're out of time. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Our episodes are typically released on Mondays. If you want to learn more about Dr. Maloff, you can check out his website, which is beverlyhillspsychologist.com. We will link to it in the show notes. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com. Or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.